Welcome to the Church Podcast, talking all things ministry so you can do church better. I'm your host, Christopher Wesley, and what I love about this conversation is even though I've only known our guest maybe like 2 years, this conversation almost feels like it's been years in the making, something that means a lot to me as a parish minister. And so I'm really excited to share this conversation with you all. Today's guest is Juan Escarfuller. He works with Fe y Vida, and basically his job at Fe y Vida is to minister, to train the next generation of Latinos to stand up, to speak up, to have a voice, to discern a life purpose, and to serve as leaders in church and society. So such important work, especially as the Latino population in this country just continues to grow, and especially in church ministry. And so we spend a lot of our time diving into that topic, as well as learning a little bit about his story, which is really fascinating and awesome. And I'm so blessed to have Juan in my life, and I'm really excited to have him a part of yours through this podcast. And before we get started, just a reminder, after the podcast, whether you like it, love it, or, that other thing, please leave a review anywhere you hear the podcast so that we can get the word out. Because the more that we can get the word out, the more support we can have for things through this podcast. So anyway, just do that at thechurchpodcast.org or anywhere you hear this podcast. But enough of that. Let's jump into this episode with Juan.
Okay.
Juan, welcome to the Church Podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, it's so good to be with you, Christopher. We've been planning this for a while, so this is finally happening.
I know. Juan, you and we met each other about 2 years ago, right? At the 10 by 10, one of their 10 by 10 pre-summit kickoffs, right? I know they've had so many different summits and kickoffs, but it was down in Southern LA. And yeah.
That's right. That's a very ecumenical movement of lots of Christians. And when I saw another Catholic across the room, I'm like, we got to connect because we're always looking for allies, right? But especially within the church. So that was so cool.
Yeah, it's definitely good to always just see a fellow Catholic. Nothing against our Protestant brothers and sisters, but sometimes it's just like, it's good to know that you can do this and they know what you're talking about. And for those
Right.
who are listening, I just blessed myself. But anyway, Juan, even though I know you, some of our listeners, some of our viewers may recognize the name, or they may not. But would you do us the honor of introducing yourself, what you do, and how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. Thanks, Christopher. A really big question that I'll leave the full answer to a novel someday that I'll write. But for the sake of this podcast, Juan Escarfuller, I'm an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. And many people ask, well, where were you born? And I say Santo Domingo. And of course, some people say, where in Mexico is that? It's actually the capital of the Dominican Republic. In fact, I was born the day Robert Kennedy died. So
Wow.
June 6, 1968. And then at age 7, immigrated with my parents here to the United States. And then shortly after that, my parents divorced. And part of it is the whole challenge, especially for my mother, to be so isolated from her family. My dad was working outside the home. And so going through the whole process of, learning by doing as a doctor, actually, learning English, learning medicine, and came here for a postdoc. My mother, a homemaker, was used to having all kinds of support in terms of her work within the home, raising us as children. But here in the US, she was completely isolated, and, put that on top of, a marital, very young couple and things like that. And next thing you know, she went back to the Dominican Republic. And so I mention that because a huge part of who I am is that I grew up alone. Because in the divorce process, they sent me to live with my dad, who was working all the time. And this was down in New Orleans, Louisiana. Very Catholic city, and I'll come back to that. But the big thing there is apparently the courts decided, because I asked why would they not leave me with my mother as they did with my younger siblings?
Mm.
And my dad said, well, because the judge said that you were old enough to go to school, and so you didn't need a mother. And I'm like, what kind of mindset is that?
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
but I say that because my dad put me in a Catholic school. And
Mm.
that made all the difference in the world because I was definitely in shock. I was in trauma. And then what happens is that my siblings have epilepsy, and it was
Mm.
too much for my mother. And my dad, being a doctor, she figured it was best to send them to be with my father so that, they could get the best medical care and that sort of thing. It ended up being that I was the mom. These are my younger
Mm.
siblings. And
Wow.
so I had to do a lot of growing up, a lot of growing up. And I'll tell you more of that story. But I want to tell you, because of this podcast, I want to say going to a Catholic school, hearing about the Beatitudes,
Mm.
you know, blessed, you know, or the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. I was feeling like a motherless child. So when I hear of God as Father, when I hear that I can be a child of God, when I wanted to fight with everybody, because first of all, I didn't speak any English. So
Mm.
I'm assuming in my troubled state that, people are out to get me or whatever. I'm looking to pick a fight. I heard the clear message that Jesus, the good news, is about making peace with your enemies, finding a way to reconcile what seems to be completely irreconcilable. And so the other thing is that during recess, because I would be getting into fights because I didn't understand the languages or even the rules to baseball, like I would stop at first base, and if someone hit the ball, I would stay at first base to avoid getting, tagged out at second. And people would look at me
Right.
like, and later I would find out they knew I'm from the Dominican Republic, so they thought I was going to be a baseball superstar, but I'm just stuck at first base. Like, why is everyone yelling at me? Uh, I started to sneak into church during
Mm.
recess, and I started to sing to a statue of Our Lady holding baby Jesus. And I developed a whole spiritual life around this notion that somehow church is sanctuary and that I had a personal relationship there that could touch my heart, especially in a place of tremendous pain. So I'm going to fast forward because there's a lot of story there, but I wanted you to know that was a huge seed to my faith, a
Mm.
huge seed to my identity, my sense of belonging, and my sense of purpose. Today, what is my purpose? I serve. My job is the executive director of Instituto Fe y Vida. Instituto Fe y Vida is a formation institute that offers human development and faith formation for young Latinos to lead in the church and in society. And we actually like to think now, because it's not just, in the US, it's very individualist. Latin America is a lot more collectivist.
Mm.
It's not just about leading as an individual leader. Everyone follow me. It's also about leading in your family,
Mm.
leading in your neighborhood, leading in your school, leading in your marriage someday, in your, we say noviazgo, in your, what do you call that, girlfriend, boyfriend process, towards
Mm.
a deepening relationship, a chase one, but a deepening of a relationship where all of a sudden leading doesn't mean that I am somehow an overlord dominating and telling people, pointing my finger what you need to do, but leading in the sense of using our God given talents, cooperating with grace that God constantly resources us with in order to build community, in order to
Yeah.
build relationship, intimacy, real, true intimacy on our way to the ultimate happiness, which is to join God in heaven. So,
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome, man. First, thank you for sharing your story. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing that kind of came to mind, and just to kind of go back to when you were a kid. So you were about 7 years old when you moved here to the States, right? And you know, at what point did you feel like that the U.S. had become home, right? And the reason I ask that question is, and I think I've shared this with you, I grew up overseas, right? I was born in the U.S., but as an infant, moved over to Japan, Hong Kong, New Zealand, moved all over the place. And so for me, home was like really hard to find or feel because for a variety of different reasons. So I'm just curious for you, like, when did here or the U.S. feel home for you?
Ninth grade, when I
Ninth
had to
grade.
go to high school. And part of it is because one of the biggest challenges to my sense of self and
Mm-hmm.
my sense of worth happened in eighth grade. I came into second grade at St. Francis of Assisi School. A shout out, they're not there anymore, in New Orleans. And that was second grade. In eighth grade, I applied for high school.
Mm-hmm.
And by then, I realized that educationally, if I learn English really well, one, I could hide the fact that I'm an immigrant. People,
Hmm.
and also the color of my skin. Most 99% of people in the Dominican Republic are black. So for many different reasons, I learned to be a chameleon because
Mm.
I knew that if I stuck out as an immigrant or as someone who has an accent, I get picked on a lot more.
Right.
In eighth grade, I'm like, top grades in my school, valedictorian, all this kind of great thing. And I applied what I thought was like the best, you know, most prestigious high school, Jesuit high school in New Orleans. And I didn't get in.
Hmm.
There was an entrance exam. I got a 93, but I didn't get in. And there were other people in my class who did get in and they had a 53. And I'm like, what?
Mm.
Come to find out there was a quota.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told, had you made a 98 or higher, you would have gotten in. And I'm like, quota? What's that? And I also, by the way, Juan, I guess, was too hard to pronounce in second grade. So I would always be known as John.
Mm.
But first of all, when I got that first lap, I remember I was in shock. I was like, wait, what? It's not a meritocracy? What's going
Right.
on? My whole
Right.
life has been about if you work hard, study hard, get the good grades, the doors will open. And then my school pulled strings. I got in and I was like, phew, thank goodness. And the first question was, what honors courses can I sign up for? Because I had a sense that I was somehow running behind, right? Everyone else had
Mm.
gotten accepted. And the person on the phone said, "Oh, no, we're doing you a favor. You're not going to be able to sign up for any honors courses. By the way, if you ever want to upset me, tell me you want to do me favors." Somehow I
It's
was
good to know.
through a confirmation process where I had enough self-respect and I just hung up the phone. And I
Mm.
ended up going to a public school. And I remember the principal at my school, St. Francis of Assisi, saying, "How could you leave God?" Because I'm going to public school, a magnet school. And
Mm.
I said, "Sister, what this whole process was not from God." And I say that was a huge shift where I finally claimed the faith for myself. I
Mm.
finally claimed I know who God is. And I had enough, I'm going to say that Garden of Eden awareness of good and evil to be able to say that was evil. And
Mm.
that's just not acceptable. And so when I say ninth grade, it's because I definitely took a leap outside of the Catholic fold and I went to a public school. And even though it was now in some ways so disorienting, because first of all, I was surrounded by all kinds of faiths, even non-faiths, all kinds of colors, all kinds of socioeconomic levels. Even though we were all there because we're smart, there were so many differences, right? I'd always gone to school with a uniform. I didn't have to think about, the fancy logos and that kind of stuff. It was just so much. But what happened is I finally felt the US is my home because I also felt, you know what? They held it against me that I come
Mm.
from another country. I'm not going to hold it against myself. I'm going to go all the way seeking the best courses, the best, to be excellent in whatever I do. And mysteriously, I went back to what happened in second grade when I would sneak into church during recess. I got active as a catechist in my local parish.
Mm.
It's like whenever the world was turning against me and pushing me and saying, you're not good enough, I found that refuge and I found it in service. I just
Mm.
finished confirmation, which was about you're getting gifts. How are you going to take those gifts and now, you know, plant them for the good of the community as opposed to, just hiding them and then getting scolded by the master when he comes back, according to the parable.
That's awesome. No, and I think there's a lot there in the sense of, facing this adversity, facing these challenges, facing these obstacles, but not necessarily giving up, but having faith in the Lord. And, one thing you were saying earlier, which really resonated with me, my parents divorced when I was a teen, is that in the midst of the messiness of what you were experiencing, that when you would go into the church, I guess during recess, right in front of the what was it, the Blessed Mother, and singing, that there was peace in that chaos. And I remember as a teen, youth ministry retreats, youth group, all those things that I was a part of, there was just peace in the church. And I sometimes feel like we're missing that for young people. I do think the church is a place where we encourage and empower young people, and or just people of all ages to be a little dangerous and go out and make disciples, right? But we also need it to be this place that's safe, where in the midst of their chaos, they can come and get refueled and restored, right? I think that's so key, and that's so important. I hope anyone who's listening to that, who has maybe had similar um, uh, childhoods as you and I have, that they were able to find the church as that place of peace for sure. Why don't we talk a little bit about, okay, so you're obviously at an early age feeling at home in the church, right? God's taking you on this journey. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into ministry, right? Because looking at your LinkedIn page, there you've got quite the impressive resume, in the sense of director of Hispanic ministry in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, and doctoral student program manager and everything, and that led you up to Fe y Vida. Talk a little bit about at what point did you know you were going to follow a life of ministry, and who were some of the people? What were some of the things that guided you along the way?
When I was at college, trying to be a good steward of time here, I worked really hard in high school, and because of what happened, with that quota of getting into high school, or not being accepted into the high school of my first choice, I worked really hard with this notion of, I'm not giving up on education as a way to use my talents for bigger and better things. And not just for me individually, but for my family. Because again, remember, I was the mother in my house. So I also had a tremendous sense of responsibility. One, to be a role model for my siblings who were going through the similar acculturation shock and processes. So I worked and worked and worked, and got into Yale, which was a huge deal. It's a huge deal for me, for my family, for my father, who was working hard. And it's not because for him it was all material. It was also so that we could come into our own and say, I'm doing an excellent job. Whatever it is we're doing, that we're doing it with excellence. And, also being immigrants and being tagged as foreigners, and all the memes around Latino foreigners, we're over-sexualized, we're lazy, we're indifferent, we're stupid. None of that was true in terms of the reality that I was living. Which reminds me, by the way, when you talk about safety, or I forgot exactly how you phrased it, but I want to say the turning point where I thought of ministry as a career is I started to pick up a pattern. It wasn't just that I felt safe in the church, it's that I could sing to Our Lady in Spanish. I could be authentic. That's the word I want to put next to safety. It was a safe space where I could lower my mask. And I noticed for myself as a Dominicano, as a Latino, and then when I was in college, naturally I wanted to be a doctor like my father, but there was something in me, and some of it is very practical. My father was never around. Why? Because he was working all the time. I think I would have loved being a medical doctor. I would have loved it because I love serving people, and I'm also intensely curious about solving problems and riddles, right? And how do you diagnose? And I love all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, I said to myself, I don't want to be absent from my own family and kids, because that's the model I had of being an excellent doctor, right? I never saw that work-life balance. And especially, I miss my father tremendously, right? We have an amazing relationship today, and I understand his own journey, right? Gustavo Gutierrez has a phrase that has always resonated for me. We each drink from our own well, and everyone has a journey and a calling from God. And I decided, somewhere in college, I'm here at the apex of a university, Yale University, right? I'm going to be making millions. I'm going to whatever, whatever, whatever. But I felt so hollow inside. And when I would go to a church, quiet, no one around, there's something about those empty churches that I absolutely love. I knew, okay, this is not going to do it. And I mentioned that to you because then the question wasn't so much what's my major and what's the career that's going to get me lots of power and money. It was, what is the truth of who I am that's trying to get out and that God is calling out from me? It's about authenticity. And I started to realize at Yale, I'm Latino. I didn't get in because somehow there was a quota or affirmation, affirmative action, although who knows, right? When they put the jigsaw puzzle together. But the point is, and I remember I would go to church, and after Mass, there was a group of Latinos who found each other at Mass in the campus ministry, and we would have breakfast together, and we were just talking. So more and more, I was bringing back the Latino-ness. And then I had a conversion experience in college, reading 7-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton.
Oh, yeah.
A man of the world. I relate. I've never fathered a child outside of wedlock, but I was shocked. It's like, oh my God, this guy really messed up.
Yeah, right.
But he found God, or God found him. And the thing that changed my life is I decided I want to retreat like he had a retreat. And so I went to a retreat, 8-day retreat at Grand Cotel, Ignatian Spirituality Retreat there outside of Lafayette, Louisiana. And it was a Holy Week, and it changed my life. It's a whole story there, but I came back on fire with a sense that God loves me no matter what.
Yeah.
Whether I become a doctor, whether I don't. And I felt so free then to truly then be my authentic self. And that's when I started to say, you know what? I'm not just going to go to church and sit alone. I'm actually going to get, like I did in 9th grade, I'm going to get active in ministry. And that's when I started getting active in tech, Teenagers Encounter Christ retreats. And then that's when I said, you know what? I so love this. I'm going to be a priest, because that was the model I had. Right.
Yeah.
And so I joined the Dominicans. They gave me some of the best years of formation, 5 years with them, from pre-novitiate all the way to having to make a decision. Do I make solemn vows? And then once again, God put me in a very, grounded my feet. And I realized I've never had a girlfriend. I remember thinking, okay, Lord, seriously? That's probably just the lust part of my head. Come on, I can't be derailing my plans of all these years, right? It's the best laid plans of mice and men. And then all of a sudden, I discerned it over a 30-day retreat back at Grand Cotel. And I realized, you know what? I am going to try religious life. But then at the end of that, I was in the space to ask the same question. And by the way, a shout out to the Dominicans, because they're the ones who taught me the language of Veritas. Does the Dominican order tell the truth of who I am? And do I tell the truth of who the Dominicans are? So that whole notion of authenticity, right? And my Latino-ness kept coming back. And I tell you all this because, then I left the Dominicans. I kept very active in St. Louis, where I had been there in formation with the Dominicans. Finished my master's in my MDiv and my MA in theology, and realized, okay, I really, really, really now as a lay person That's a horizon that had totally opened up for me. Being in love, having a family, wanting to have kids, it things just fell together. And by the way, it wasn't just me individually. I had tremendous support from the Dominicans, from Aquinas Institute to finish my studies and mentoring. I had tremendous support from the Latino community where I had been a seminarian. I remember the day I
Yeah.
announced it, I was afraid they were going to be throwing rocks at me because people would be coming up to me as a seminarian, Father, can I confess to you? And I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, no. But I realized there was very much of a loving pastoral relationship there, and I felt like I was going to let them down. When I said to them that I was leaving, right after Mass, do you need any sheets and blankets? Do you need any pots and pans? I can sell you my car for $400. Once again, the Lord guiding me through the goodness of the community. And I tell you all that because then in the end, what ended up happening is I served as Hispanic ministry director, then realized as a lay Latino to get more respect within the church and more opportunities for the community. I wanted to get a doctorate at Vanderbilt in New Testament because I love stories, as you can tell. And I'm a preacher at heart, which is why there was a good affinity with the Dominicans. And in that whole process, and we can go into that story, but basically I ended up here at Fe y Vida, in many ways paying it forward.
Yeah.
Because I'm working with young Latinos who are also struggling with questions of identity, questions of belonging, lots of discrimination, and questions of purpose, right? It's not like my life has the answer for everybody. It's
Yeah.
that God gave me a calling, and I've had to really, really struggle to be authentic, right? To be willing, especially in front of God, to say, okay, Lord, this is what I really think.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a moment to break and talk about one of our sponsors, and that sponsor is Sacrilegious. I mean, do you feel holy? Maybe you don't. Do you look good? Maybe you don't. Well, Sacrilegious is the perfect combination of helping you feel holier and definitely making you feel good with their incredible t-shirts and sweatshirts and all sorts of awesome swag. Not only do they have t-shirts and sweatshirts, they also got great mugs. They have stickers. They have things for babies. And you can get custom orders through their company, Four Marks Printing. In fact, check out CP Plus, for a little bit of a discount on that. But anyway, Sacrilegious. Head to sacrilegious.com. Check out all the awesome gear that they have. Start looking good, start looking holier, and start feeling better about yourself. All right, enough of that. Back to the show. One of the reasons why I'm so glad you shared your story is because it does reflect in the work that you're doing with Fe y Vida, right? I mean, I think two of the biggest questions that people, especially young people, are facing right now is where do I belong and what's my purpose, right? Where do I belong and what's my purpose? And I've shared with you now working in a multicultural church, especially one with a growing Hispanic population, which recently has become now the majority. Like before the pandemic, we had a small Hispanic population, but since then it's flipped the other way. And, we're seeing more and more young people, which is great, like wanting to get involved, wanting to lead, but they're asking that question, where do I belong in this parish community? Where do I belong in the greater community, right? Not just the church. And what's my purpose? Exactly how am I supposed to live this out? So if you could speak a little bit to some of the work that Fe y Vida is doing in regards to being these pastoral agents for young leaders and their parents, especially with the Latino population in the United States, like what are some of the things that you're doing? What are the things that you're learning and seeing that would be helpful for those who are watching and listening to this show?
I want to give a special shout out to the Christian Brothers. Fe y Vida was founded 30 years ago, March 16th, 1994.
Wow.
I looked at the articles of incorporation by the Christian Brothers of the Midwest District. They use district instead of province. And this is really important because we are then truly a Lasallian ministry and continue to be that. And what does that mean? It means, first of all, following the way of St. John Baptist de La Salle, who was a revolutionary, a badass. I'm going to use that word. Why? Because he had a very comfortable life. For those of us who enjoy
Mhm.
champagne, you may know Moet et Chandon. Moet is the last name of his mother. So very comfortable there in the vineyards around Reims, France, which was like the Vatican of France. That's where the kings would go to get crowned,
Mhm.
not in Paris. And, he works for the cathedral. He's a canon. He's going to inherit it very, very comfortable. And one day he's the accountant for a convent that has vineyards. He knows all about that business. He goes in, and at the front door, he has an encounter with two young, poor men, boys,
Mhm.
Adrian and Christophe Niel. And later he writes it changed his life. It was the hand of God. It was imperceptible at the time, but basically he ends up having a conversation at that chance encounter. How much it was chance, or as we say in Spanish, diosidencia, a God coincidence.
Mhm.
He feels a call to take them in, live together in community, and establish what these two young men were going to get the sisters to help fund, which is to establish schools that are free. Back then in France, the schools, you had to pay. You had to pay for your uniform. You had to pay for your books. So you got a growing working class, a growing class in the lowest socioeconomic poverty. And what are their kids doing? Well, they're not in school. They're hanging out in the streets. They're, doing manual labor, bringing, collecting change at the corners, whatever they can to help the family that's struggling. And his genius was to do two things. He established free schools and he taught in French, the language
Mhm.
of the people, instead of Latin.
Mhm.
And also the third revolutionary thing that I'll learn a lot more this summer when I do some more Lasallian formation, he had a pedagogical innovation, which is rather than a lecture, talking head, and everyone's supposed to listen and take notes, he would customize.
Mhm.
This child needs this child needs that, and give them kind of almost Montessori before Montessori method. Each child works on their particular project, right? And you have a teacher that is more of a walking around and
Mhm.
figuring out how's it going. And so that kind of careful attention to the individual in the midst of a classroom.
Yeah.
And I tell you those things because what is Fe y Vida? 30 years ago, the Christian Brothers said, who are the young people that are most on the margin of society, that are socially, culturally, linguistically invisibilized, right? I mean, they're here, but it's like they have eyes to see but don't see, ears to hear but don't hear. And they decided it's the young Latinos,
Mhm.
especially because of immigration, but especially because the fastest growing population is the children who are US born English speaking of those immigrants.
Yeah.
But who's attending to them? The assimilationist pressure. Oh, you were born here and you speak English? We don't need to talk about your family.
Right.
We don't even need to incorporate your parents in a parent teacher conference because we know they are not going to be able to understand English, but you do. And there's all kinds of displacement, and where the young people realize, oh man, back to what I was feeling when the Jesuits said no. It's
Yeah.
like, you got to be kidding me. I'm not good enough as I am. I got to be someone else. And so it's easy to see how young Latinos not only get marginalized in society, but they even get yanked out of their families and from a sense of roots, right? Especially if my parents are cleaning in the kitchen, even when it's a Chinese restaurant, look in the kitchen.
Mhm.
I laugh. It's like full of my people. And it's sort of
Right.
like, do people know this? Maybe my parents don't have the highest paying or the most status jobs or positions, or maybe they can't speak English or they speak it with an accent and they're going to be, people look down upon them. Part of what Fe Vida through the Christians Brothers vision does is bring back that charism of we're going to have a preferential option for young people, and not just any young person, but the poor,
Mhm.
the most socially marginalized. And then one thing I do want to bring out in their pedagogy, which is very much personalized, They believe that you can't have faith formation unless you have good, healthy, holy, happy human development. And
Yeah.
so to me, that is so Latino. Church is not just a Sunday thing. I sit in my pew, I listen to a homily, receive the Blessed Sacrament, and I split, and then I live the rest of my life. All of that is woven together, right?
So
My faith should be related to, why are the lights out in my neighborhood, so that drug dealers can be dealing stuff that they shouldn't be dealing, on the street corners. Where are this whole community organizing piece that was important for Cesar Chavez, and the boycotts and the grapes for the sake of, and the lettuce workers for the sake of, labor rights for the migrant workers, connecting, he's having marches with banners of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Some people would say, that's pagan. I mean, that's weird.
right.
They're not used to religion informing life, and life informing. To me, that is so Catholic, especially as a Latino, growing up with that fusion between the two. So Fe y Vida in Spanish literally means faith and life. And what we do, I'll give you an example, is not only are we culturally responsive, meaning we take seriously who raised you, where are you from, tell us a story. And I'm not talking about this romantic notion of, some kind of, it never is in reality, there's some kind of mythic land that one day we'll go back to, across the border. I'm saying about God in the city, this city, your city. How were you raised? What did y'all do at home, right? Not just what happens on Sunday, or also what happens on Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Did you go to Mass? Was it in Spanish? Was it in English? Was there any kind of catechesis around that? And I'll give you an example. So Fe y Vida has a program for teens, because the tendency after confirmation is, woohoo, we graduated. We don't have to go back to church ever again. And the parents, we're complicit, because I don't have to yank my teenager to a Mass that I don't even go to. And then when the day the teenager says, why are you telling me I have to keep going to church when you don't go, when you don't want to? It's like, okay, we're not having this conversation. Bye.
Yeah.
So the thing is, to me, that is a disgrace. That's a lost opportunity, because going back to my story, I was able to hang up that phone on that very, very, discriminatory offer, because I had from confirmation enough sense of respect, self-respect, that God is calling me with my gifts to put them to use in the community, right? To lead, to use that kind of language. And so what Fe y Vida does, like with teenagers, we have a week-long program where they come, and rather than talking heads, lecturing in Latin, whatever, and making this a moneymaker, we offer scholarships so that don't ever let, the cost of something get in the way of participating. But we have them, the teenagers, lead the processes. And part of it is that after your first year, you get to come back for more training. The third year, you get to come back as a facilitator. And I'm going to end on this point. Sorry for the long answer, but the most powerful thing that drew me to Fe y Vida is when I first heard that Fe y Vida is what? The most powerful evangelizers of a young person are other young people. So the language in our circle is to say we center the voices of young Latinos. We're used to being invisibilized, like we were talking about. All of a sudden, no, you're going to get to lead from the front of the room. What? Who does that? What kind of spaces are offered like that? Well, Fe y Vida offers you that space to learn, to grow, and then to be able to serve as a leader and put all of that stuff that has grown in you at the service of the community, especially of your peers.
Well, and I mean, I think that's so important. And you mentioned human development, right? Because there's so often in church where it's safe for us to just talk about the intellectual side of theology, right? It's like, memorize this, know this, learn this, which is so important, so valuable. But if there's not a place for them to apply it, right? There's not a place to talk about, like you said, how does faith live in your community? How does life not interfere, but how does life influence and intertwine with faith? And I think when we do that, we're approaching it from a holistic standpoint, and that's so good and so healthy. And it's really good for an organization like Fe y Vida to do that, especially for populations that are marginalized, that are forgotten about, that are on the fringes and everything like that. So one of the next question I want to ask you is, how can we in the local church, right? If I'm a director of religious education, a youth minister, pastor listening to this, how can I take some of the practices that Fe y Vida is doing as an organization and incorporate them into my local church?
Look for examples. Look for examples of what are parishes or organizations that seem to be having success at engaging young people, and engaging them not just because they fill a room, but because they come alive in their faith in Christ to the point where it's contagious. They want to go out and share it. In other words, the dominant model of youth ministry is, we keep them at the kiddie table, we entertain them, and we separate them from the parish. We even separate them from the parents who maybe are in the parking lot waiting to pick them up when they finish, right? It's almost like parallel universes. What I find even the more successful models are those who, in some ways, if you know the work of Eric Law, yes, young people need to have their own spaces. They need to be able to speak to one another without editing, because, the lambs, when they know the wolves are in the room, okay, everyone speak English. If you've seen Babe, you know what I'm referring to.
I do.
But that's only a stepping stone towards full participation and integration in the parish. So do those young people get to participate in the planning, in the designing, in the delivery, in the follow-up, in the celebration of the Day of the Dead, for example, in our case, or Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is not just the day of December 12th, but you could have nochecitas, the evening prayers and rituals, where people from the parish can come and sing and proclaim poetry to Our Lady. Why not have a youth track, right, to be part of that? So part of what I want to say, if I'm a youth minister in a parish, I would say, first of all, is it a value for you, the young people in your community, to be fully participating and contributing in the parish community, right? Because if it's not, then we're not on the same page. And part of me wants to say, good luck. But unless we have that shared value of how no parish is going to thrive without incorporating young people, not at the kiddie table. We need kiddie tables because there's a developmental process, but we can't just leave them there, right? Because then confirmation comes, and of course they're going to split. But what if we are, even from First Communion, we're giving them a sense of that we're called to serve, right? And so part of what I want to tell any youth minister is look at the models. What are the parishes that are being successful, right? And by the way, this is not just an economic thing. In St. Louis, I saw out in the suburbs have tons houses that are $1 million, Life Teen. And boy, I felt like I was at a rock concert. And for some people, that's very appealing. But I said, why doesn't Life Teen come into the inner city where I'm doing Hispanic ministry, right? And so there's a part of me that wants to say, oh, you got to have lots of money. It's like people who think, to eat healthy, you got to go to Whole Foods.
Right.
Nothing against Whole Foods, but it tends to be pricier, right? What I want to say is, as a youth minister, don't be scared or, check yourself before you wreck yourself about thinking, oh, I got to have a huge budget. I got to this or that, or I got to be in the suburbs with a church that has thousands of kids. Look at different models. And also you're going to find, no, there are some things that work in the inner city. And maybe this is where I want to land. Look local. The whole Catholic principle of subsidiarity. Look local. So one of the things is get to know your community. Don't come in with a program right away.
Yeah.
Why don't you spend the first year? Yeah. Father may not like this, because they want results. They're overworked, and we got to have results. But what if you spent the first year doing a survey of who's out there in the community? Maybe you go to people's homes rather than waiting for them to come to your office, right? Maybe you set it up also so that you don't just go individually, but maybe you go with Father. After Sunday Mass, that Sunday afternoon, I know the priest is exhausted. They've had 2, 3, maybe even more Masses. But that's a great time, Sunday afternoons, when families tend to have kind of on the down low, things are calming down. We're getting ready for Monday. I say this based on my experience where I did some of this. Some of it is learn your people because, and this is my teaching philosophy, if you don't demand something of your students, of course, they're going to just lay back. But if you let your people know in your parish, we want to turn this around. How do you want to turn it around? What do you not like? What do you like? This is like the one-on-one in community organizing, trying to identify people's self-interest. You do that kind of basic organizing work with your people and they become stakeholders, then all of a sudden someone might say, hey, I got a great idea. Why don't we have a parish music competition where we say, who wants to write a song or come up with a performance? And these are ideas, by the way, the Salesians do this in the Dominican Republic, and they've even gone national with this. And this jazzes up at the local level. So the thing is, I think our poverty sometimes within ministry, poverty in the sense of lack of ideas and initiatives, is because we bemoan the limits we have, that scarcity thinking. I say, look up and then look to your own people.
Yeah.
And see what kind of ideas. And maybe they need to be exposed to, hey, you know what that other parish is doing? You think that would work here? And you're going to have naysayers. That's part of the process. Never, I believe, never impose, always propose. And so it's just some basic things about, I think there's a definite planning, organizing process that unfortunately I don't think youth ministers learn. I learned it because of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, look how the mouse is bringing down lions.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty basic in terms of do a campaign in the parish and get to know who your people are. And it's asset mapping, right? What do we actually already have? And by the way, a parish that's alive will draw people. Will draw people. And all of a sudden you have more resources than you thought you had.
Hey, sorry. I know another ad. All right. Yep. We'll get back to the show. Trust me. But I wanted to take some time to talk about the church podcast premium subscription. That's right. We have a premium subscription where when you sign up for CP Plus, you not only get episodes earlier, you not only get away from these ads and these annoying ads and everything, but we're going to send you a free subscription to MYM Premium where you get videos and downloadable resources for you and your team so you can get better at ministry. You also will get producer credits, and there's nothing better than producer credits, right? Especially for a niche podcast like this one. So why wait for that? Also, when you sign up for CP Plus, we're going to give you 10% off your first custom t-shirt order at 4 Marks Printing, one of our sponsors here at the Church Podcast. But the best part, when you sign up for CP Plus, is that 50% of your proceeds, 50% of what you give towards CP Plus each month, goes towards the Ministry Training Source, which is an organization that's focused on research for professional ministry. So even if you're not a professional minister, you're helping us figure out how we can support and build up the profession of lay ecclesial ministry. So what do you have to do? Just go to thechurchpodcast.org and scroll down and you'll see a box for the Church Podcast Plus premium subscription. And that's all you got to do. So instead of buying a third of a pizza, sign up for a monthly subscription at thechurchpodcast.org. Anyway, enough from me. Back to the show. Totally agree. And I think that's a great place to kind of start to wrap things up because, number one thing is know your people, look local, look for different models and everything like that. So Juan, seriously, priceless advice there. But as we wrap up, Do you have time for our final 5 questions?
Of
It's the
course.
5 questions we ask all of our guests, and I don't know if at this point people like them or not, but I like them. So anyway, here's the first question. In addition to prayer, because we can all agree prayer is probably the most valuable resource out there, in addition, with having that relationship with God. So in addition to prayer, what is one tangible tool or resource that has helped you be your most truest or productive self?
Doing an annual retreat. One of the things that I find that's a real challenge for me in ministry is that it's easy to become a bureaucrat.
Mm.
And especially if I have success as an administrator, it's easy for me to forget God,
Yeah.
forget grace, and think, oh, it's because I work hard, because I'm smart, because, I hired great people, great talent. And one of the things I notice is that many of us stop to pray, meaning we stop praying, we don't pray anymore, or we don't take time. It gets squeezed out of our very busy schedules. When I do an annual retreat, it reminds me of my why.
Mm.
So whenever I'm having a hard day, having had time, Jesus, what does he always do in all of the Gospels? Hey, guys, I'm going to go pray
He goes
by
retreat.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So finding a place, a true kind of, it's like in the desert, finding that well of spring water,
Yeah.
and doing it annually reminds me of my why, so that I don't just settle for being a good bureaucrat.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Question number 2. What are you currently reading or watching or listening to that you feel like everyone else has to experience?
A huge wow for me in the last month is I discovered a podcast called The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett.
Okay.
He brings on content experts, influencers from across the world in all kinds of fields. And it's like your podcast. It's based on an interview where he asks questions. He's a great interviewer. Because one of the things that the secret sauce, I think, for us at Fe y Vida, most young people are used to adults talking to them. Stephen models the power of asking a good question.
Awesome.
And I find that asking questions helps young people to be co-responsible for their own well, right? As opposed to just shutting me off because I'm, like Snoopy, wah, 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 wah,
Yeah.
wah. It's like, if I ask you a question, that's not just yes or no. All of a sudden, people, I think, want to be gotten and they want to tell their story. And all of a sudden, it opens an opportunity to be listened to, which is so rare in our ocean of so much information. So I'm going to emphasize that particular podcast because, first of all, the content is amazing. There's stuff on health. There's stuff on productivity, time management, relationships. It's not Catholic. It is Catholic in the sense of it's universal. You've got all kinds of folks there. So I'm not endorsing what anyone there in particular says, but it's a great way for me to, in my very limited time, to just absorb a lot of information and think for myself because the questions there are just fantastic.
Definitely. Well, like you said, the art of question asking is so important in ministry. All right. What's the worst ministry or leadership advice that you've ever got from someone regarding, especially regarding the work that you do?
Don't rock the boat. And I'm going to be very honest here. I came from the world of, after Hispanic ministry director, I worked at a children's hospital in preventing obesity studies with Latino kids from NIH, and I got paid a lot better. And that's one of the reasons that kind of drew me in that direction, to take care of my family. Then when I came back into ministry, people would say, this institute is poor for the poor, as a way of lowballing me, as a way of saying, you can't expect that kind of salary. It's not like that kind of salary. That salary was $57,000 at one point. It went up over the years in that NIH world. And I come back and people are talking about 30. People are talking about 42. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to have even more impact here. And these are the kind of salaries we're offering people. And people would say, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat because, number one, you're not going to get jobs. But I had to work really, really hard to rock that boat. And why is this important? Not just because of my own kind of, how much I have in a bank account. Other young people, especially if they're professionals, they're looking for that kind of wage justice. Do you have medical insurance? That costs money. What's the package? I want to be competitive and say, hey, God could be calling. I bet you God calls tons of people to ministry. I don't want to be one of those low ballers that basically gets in the way of people engaging in ministry because we don't want to give them a just wage or a comparable wage. We don't pay hundreds of thousands, right? But we definitely need to be more aware and rock that boat.
Yeah.
Because the culture is one of father does it all, sister does it all, and they're subsidized either by the diocese or by the religious community. With lay people, especially when they have families and stuff, that's not going to cut it. We have to rock that boat.
Well, and I guess that's going to lead me into the next question. If you had one message for someone new in ministry, what would that advice or wisdom be? Is it rock the boat or something in addition to that?
Well, I'm going to say rock the boat, but in a very concrete way. Get yourself a therapist, get yourself a coach / mentor, and get yourself a spiritual director.
Amen to that. Yeah.
I just heard that at the NFCYM conference from Osman Ospino, who gave a presentation. And I thought that is such savvy advice because we don't do this alone. And if we do, we only repeat the mistakes of others who've gone before us and are burnt out, right? It's like the surgeons of old who say, wait a minute, I had to do 3 all-nighters in a week. Why do these young medical students get to go home and sleep? One, because they don't kill patients as a result.
Yeah.
And I realize that many of us burn out in ministry and are struggling and are stressed. And that's contagious. Why do young people many times leave the church and say, oh, that's for crazy people? Well, one, because they look at what do we model as ministers?
Yeah.
And so I think that self-care, but it's not just self-care, oh, I'm going to rub myself and, it's about concretely get into, therapy, coaching, especially spiritual direction, because even though you might think the church is the most spiritual place, when we get busy, it's out the door.
Yeah.
And so we have to be held accountable. And I think there are some, those kind of relationships can help immensely. I say that because the pressures build up. They don't diminish. Because I think we're doing such good God's work, that there's an enemy as well that kind of like tries to get in the head. And it's like, you don't need that kind of stuff. That's for crazy people.
Or sometimes we think it's at a level that we don't deserve, right? Especially the coach, mentor, therapist sort of thing. But we're talking about human formation, spiritual formation, pastoral formation, and those people that you mentioned can be such an asset to that. So I think that's huge. All right, Juan, final question. What's your biggest hope for the church at this time?
There's a lot of sin, and I'm not pointing fingers. I recognize that in my own life. I tell my kids, I'm still in the process of reparation, making up for some things.
Right.
I find that some of the most powerful things in the world are 2 phrases: I'm sorry, and how can I make it up to you? But for me, the biggest hope is that where sin abides, grace abounds even more. And so my biggest hope is that I constantly see, flickers of God's grace all around, saying, get up. I forgive you. Get up. No matter what. The most powerful poem, I remember that transition of my conversion in college, was Footprints. We call it Huellas in Spanish, where I look at, the story of my life and I'm like, wait a minute. It's just my footprints. Why? Where did you go? And he says, dude, those are my footprints. I'm carrying you in those the hardest moments. So my biggest hope is that I see every day, especially in the testimonies of young Latinos, teens. I know the society says they're all Peter Pan, they're all foolish, deluded, screenagers. The other day I saw that phrase. They're now screenagers. You know what? When we touch their hearts, and this is so John Baptiste de La Salle, you want a miracle? Touch the hearts of the young people we serve. And then when they speak to the transformation they're going through, I hear God's grace all the time. And so for me, it's that constant invitation from the church. Whatever you're going through, we can be a space to name God's grace all around us.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Juan, this was a great conversation, and I know we could talk ongoing, and we don't see each other enough, so we're going to have to figure that out off cam. But if people want to learn more about you or Fe y Vida, where can they go?
They can go right to our website, feyvida.org. Feyvida.org. We have another one in Spanish called bibliaparajovenes.org. Biblia is Bible, para, for, jóvenes, young or youth.org. Bibliaparajovenes.org, because we have a whole Biblia Católica para Jóvenes, a whole Bible in Spanish with all kinds of free resources.
Oh, awesome.
Retreats, music videos, et cetera, because one of the things at Fe y Vida we believe in is helping young people encounter Christ through the Bible. The most powerful story for us of the good news. So those are two websites that I'd like to put out there. And just real quick, my cell phone, 615-636-7618. Leave a message, because if I don't know the number, I won't answer. But the point is, this is about connecting people. And while I may not have an answer, I would love to be, pay it forward and connect people to other resources that have been helpful to me or that I've heard from others. We are a community of practice, and so we need to work on being gente puente, bridge builders, and happy to do that through the website and that number.
Well, there you go, people. Juan gave you a direct line to him, and I know I've been blessed by knowing you, Juan, and look forward to us growing together in Christ over the God's plan, right? So anyway, thank you again for being on the show, for sharing your story, and know that we're always praying for you in Fe y Vida. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christopher. God be praised.
Okay.
This has been a production of Marathon Youth Ministry, the church podcast talking all things ministry, produced by Stephen Herrera and Be Well Creative. Music provided by Loco Joseph. No animals were hurt in the production of this podcast. Please be sure to tip your waiters. See you next time.